Hey guys, welcome to my Animal Adventures YouTube channel, and in this episode I want to talk to you about snakes watching television. Believe it or not, I have some information that will blow your mind, and I also want to cover some of my cattle. Someone left a comment on one of my videos and they said, hey, what's going on with your cows? And I used to do quite a few updates on my cows, and I haven't showed you my cows in quite a while. So what I'm going to do is talk to you about snakes watching television, and then I'm going to show you just a quick update of my Black Angus cattle. So I was actually at the Reptile show selling snakes, and there's this lady that actually, she comes to almost every single reptile show. She brings her own snakes, and she's bought a few of mine actually, and she has 20 snakes. Well, actually I think it's 19. She's looking for number 20, and she keeps them just as pets. Sometimes you'll see her walking around with a snake around her neck, or sometimes she'll have like a whole tub of snakes, and it's really interesting. This one's kind of freaking out a little bit. It's kind of interesting that she brings her pet snakes to the reptile shows. As a matter of fact, she says she actually lets her snakes roam around the house. Free roam style. I thought it was pretty incredible how many people actually just let their snakes crawl around the house. She puts them on the bed, lets them crawl around the living room and down the hallways. I was like, wow, this is really unique. I've never actually heard of just letting your snakes crawl around the house. They're all ball pythons, so there's really not much harm in it. Ball pythons are really mellow, and I would imagine that you could just let them free roam your house, no problem at all. The only thing is you'd probably have to run around and clean up after them. That's the only thing. And the other thing she mentioned was she actually takes her snakes, puts them on the bed, and they crawl over to the television and stop in front of the television, and they just sit there mesmerized by the television. Apparently ball pythons really have an affinity for watching television. I never knew that. I thought that was pretty interesting, and I've actually tried to watch TV. Well, I don't actually have a TV. I turned my TV off years ago. I don't actually watch it. What I actually watch is my computer. I do like mostly like Netflix or movies on YouTube, stuff like that. And I actually tried watching television with some of my snakes, and let me tell you, it can be a good experience or it can be a bad experience. So if you take a ball python like this happens to be my pastel calico female, really beautiful snake. And a ball python is never really, I would say, in feeding mode, especially when you're handling them, you have them on your lap, and it's just, the ball pythons are really hard to get to feed, so they never kind of switch to feeding mode, especially if you're handling them. You really have to put them in a tub and leave them alone, put them like in a dark place to get them to switch over to feeding mode. Well, sometimes I'd say it depends on the snake. Sometimes if you have like a hatchling or one that's kind of just growing up from a hatchling, sometimes they go into feeding mode a little more readily. But I'd say an adult ball python never really goes into feeding mode. And my mistake is I was actually trying to watch some movies on my computer with my reticulated python. I was actually watching it with Lucy when she was a little bit smaller. When she was really small, as a matter of fact, she was a lot smaller than this snake. I'd say probably a third of this size. Now she's about 60 pounds, but I was actually watching movies with a reticulated python on my lap, and that reticulated python went into feeding mode. And let me tell you, if you have a reticulated python going into feeding mode on your lap, it is not a good thing, because they are looking at your hand like it's something to eat. That is not where you want to be. And I actually tried the same thing with my king snake. I had a California king snake, and I was doing the same thing, watching television, and it went into feeding mode, and it was right next to me. And let me tell you, I was trying to dodge the bite from my king snake, trying to put it back in the enclosure. So I would say if you're watching TV with a snake, I would highly recommend doing it with a ball python. I'd probably be hesitant to do it with a reticulated python or a king snake or something that's a little more easily that switches from a handling mode to a feeding mode. You definitely don't want your snakes going into feeding mode. As a matter of fact, a lot of snakes, if you actually take them off of your body, off of your person, and you put them, for example, on like somewhere where you're not always touching them, they seem to go into feeding mode a lot more readily. So if you're watching TV with your snakes, you probably want to keep it on your lap. You probably want to always keep a hand or two on the snake, and that always pretty much keeps them in handling mode versus feeding mode. And this one's really starting to, typically I don't wrap them around my neck like this. They can really choke you out. They have a lot of strength for a snake like this, and I just kind of wanted to get them up on camera so you could see them. And it's, generally I pretty much just kind of drape them over my neck, and especially with reticulated pythons, you definitely don't want a snake like that wrapped around your neck. So anyway, from here what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a quick update on my cattle out in the barnyard, and let's check out my cows. Alright guys, so I dusted off my old cowboy hat here, and I want to show you my beef cattle. I have 4 head of cattle. I have 2 bulls, a heifer, and a steer. And I've pretty much raised all of these. Actually the bulls I raised from calves, and then the other 2 I raised as they were offspring of my breeding operation here. I was actually up to 12 cows at one point, and now I'm just down to 4. And the hay went up really expensive. What I'm feeding right now is actually just a straight alfalfa. And the thing about alfalfa is you get a lot of this stemmy, I'd say it's mostly stems that they really don't like to eat, and then a lot of these really powdery leaves. And really, to feed alfalfa correctly, you need some kind of a catch tray to where all the leaves fall down, and they pretty much just clean up the leaf powder. This is T-Bone. He's one of my big bulls. He's all full of alfalfa. And this guy, he's really old. He's almost getting to the point where he's too big to mate with the females because he is just too heavy. He's probably, I'd say, about 2,000 or 2,200 pounds. He is a massive beast. And the problem with him is now that he's getting really old, he's getting really bad feet, and he can hardly walk around. And I think this summer I'm gonna process him and turn him into about 4 freezer fulls of beef. An animal like this will make an incredible amount of beef. I'd say I'd probably get 1,300 pounds of hamburger and steak and everything from that animal. That's actually the first animal that I've ever considered processing, and it's only because he's not really good for a breeder, and I really feel bad selling him, and I don't think he would get around much longer because he's old and he's kind of getting pretty crippled. And then this girl right here, she is gonna have a baby. She is definitely pregnant. I brought her back from pasture last October, and she bred with these 2 bulls, one bull or the other, and I'm hoping she'll actually have a bull calf that'll replace my bull calves, and I can actually replace both bulls with her baby, and I can pretty much grow up my own bull from a calf, which would be pretty neat. And then this guy over here, this is my steer. I raised this guy from a baby. It's just a tiny little, when they come out, they're born, they're like 70 pounds, and they grow incredibly fast. Last fall, I ran him down on pasture with this girl, and he grew like a rocket down there. These are the most highly desirable animals as far as the Black Angus beef industry. Everybody wants the Angus steers, and it's basically a castrated bull turns them into a steer, and they have the best meat of pretty much every animal that you can, every beef animal that you can find. The Black Angus steers are the most desirable and probably the most expensive. And bulls, I'd say you get a lot of meat from a bull. The problem is it's not quite as good of meat as an Angus steer for some reason. It's kind of interesting how the whole thing works. So the bulls, a lot of people, they'll turn them into a lot of hamburger versus, on a steer, they'll turn them more into steaks and really prime meat. And a lot of times you don't really want an animal to get as big as a bull because they really get tougher the older they get. And it's kind of weird to think about, processing an animal, especially if you raise it and it's you know, you're used to raising it and taking care of it, and they're somewhat friendly. I would say they're friendly enough not to, you know, attack me and knock me over. But it's weird being a farmer. It's a different mindset, and you have a different mentality. I would say it's kind of like raising rats. You know, they're all your pets, and you really enjoy taking care of them, and you really care about them, and you're really concerned about them. And then at the end of their life, they're still useful for meat, which is weird to think about if you're not any kind of a food animal rancher, farmer. It's kind of weird. And sometimes, you know, the neighbors' kids, they get kind of confused when, you know, they're butchering their animals. And I really enjoy just having them, and you can keep them a really long time before you even think about butchering. As a matter of fact, I've never really butchered any of my own beef cattle. I've always sold them live. This is the first one that I'm really considering processing, which is interesting. And as a matter of fact, I've had a lot of cows that a lot of people buy them as pets because, you know, it's a tax write-off on their land. They don't want to process the animals, and they just keep them around as pets, which is kind of interesting. And if you kind of look around here, we're in the middle of a meltdown up here in the mountains of Colorado at 9,000 feet. We kind of have a swamp going. All the snow is finally melting after a long, pretty much permafrost winter. And what I really need to do, as soon as all this snow melts, I rent a big skid steer and I go through and I clean up the whole barnyard. And this is their little loafing shed. I built this out of trees on my sawmill. I actually cut all the trees. I bought a sawmill. I was unemployed for about 8 months, and I worked to actually cut all the wood on this entire building right here. And let me tell you, it is a fantastic shelter. It's probably, I'd say, about 8 years old now. And then I built this one too. This is my bear-proof chicken coop, and I cut some really big trees. If you look at how big some of these boards are, they are incredibly big. There's some massive trees I used to build some of these structures, and this is really a neat, I'd say it's a neat setup. I really enjoy having the cows and the animals. I used to have ducks and chickens and llamas and a milk cow and a whole bunch of stuff, and now I'm pretty much down to just 4 beef cows. All right, so those were my cows, and that was a little episode on snakes watching television. I think it's pretty interesting that snakes actually have an affinity for watching television, something I didn't expect. And it makes me wonder really how smart snakes really are, because, you know, they don't make any sounds, they don't have any legs, they don't have any arms, they really can't be trained per se. I've actually seen one place where it was in a zoo, kind of a zoo environment, and they had a cobra that was trained to go into a box when they clean their cage. And what they do is they start a little waterfall, and the sound of the waterfall would trigger the snake to actually go in this little box. They'd close up the box and then clean the enclosure. And I started thinking, wait a minute, snakes can be trained. They can actually watch television. How smart are your snakes? It's something you can kind of ponder as you're playing with your pet snake. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.